you miss me? I've been out of a comatose
Hello and
position.
welcome to Controlled Burns, the weekly hobby list podcast for me, SlowBurne from Wildfire Gaming. On this week's episode, I'm coming at you with a fairly unique list, which is the top 25 most beautiful video games of all time. This is an idea that I got from a recent episode of MinMax, where they picked some of their picks for the most beautiful video games of all time. But I wanted to take mine and put it in an actual list format and talk about it that way. Before we go any further, I'd just like to remind you that Controlled Burns is a weekly hobby list podcast with a particular focus on lists and topics related to video games, music, TV, and film, as well as other hobbies and aspects of pop culture. If you're interested in writing into the podcast and having your comments or questions read on air, you can write into the podcast at controlledburns with an es at gmail.com. Now, there's no single metric for what I'm talking about here when I'm considering the definition of beautiful when it comes to video games. Definitely the visuals of the game are being taken into consideration, but I think art style is going to be given more importance than graphical fidelity. For example, The Last of Us Part 2, one of my favorite games ever made. It's one of the most visually impressive video games I've ever played. But I do not have it on my list of the top 25 beautiful video games because um, kind of with the themes and just like the overall violence of the game and just the kind of muted tones of the game world as well and being in Seattle. So beyond the visuals, I'm also taking atmosphere and music and presentation into account as well. And then I think also just the overall themes of the game are going to be taken into consideration. So kind of merging all of that criteria together, I've come up with 25 games that I've played. I mean, it's obviously I can only discuss the games that I myself have experienced. Um, and I've put together a list of 25 games here. And I also really it's 26, 27. So I do have like a couple sort of almost interchangeable games that I have for my one honorable mention slot, which is The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild slash Tears of the Kingdom. In terms of presentation of a world that many of us hold very dearly in our hearts as Zelda fans, these are fantastic. I really like the art style and the way the game connects you with the outdoors of Hyrule through minimum use of music. It's very striking. But I will say the games are held back a little bit, particularly in terms of performance due to the hardware limitations of the Nintendo Switch. And there are times when the environments actually do look pretty bare and undercooked as well. So I couldn't quite give them a spot on the main list, but I did want to kind of mention them as beautiful games in their own right. So on the main list here, at number 25, I have another Zelda game. This is The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker. I think any game as old as Wind Waker is, for it to hold up as visually as it does, um, is no small feat. I played through this game a couple of years ago on my Wii, utilizing component cables on my big HD television. So it's probably slightly better quality than what I could have gotten on a GameCube, but not by much. The art style is a clear example of video games as an art form. But I also think the presentation and atmosphere of sailing the open seas creates a unique experience that is still novel today. At 24, I have Hades. I would have put Hades up here on the strength of the Switch version that I played in 2020 alone, but I also very recently started up the PS5 version of the game. And was just amazed yet again at how beautiful it is. It's got this stark color scheme combined with the cel-shaded visuals. It's a very striking combination. The artwork for literally every character is a true work of art as well. I also think the presentation of the game, with the music in particular, is incredible. The way it kind of continues between rooms and rises and falls in its instrumentation to match the moment. Very, very cool. Finally, I love all of the artistic touches represented on Zagreus himself as you're playing him, and like his moves change depending on the countless different booms and combinations of abilities that he can have on him at any given run. In particular, I think about like a good example is like when he has the Poseidon boon on his dash attack, and it, like every time he dashes, like this water splashes out around him. Is kind of a particular standout example, but yeah, playing Hades again right now, and it's just truly a gorgeous game. Number 24 on this list. Number 23, I have The Artful Escape. The Artful Escape wouldn't really work if the game wasn't beautiful. So happily it pulls off what it's going for with its absolutely gorgeous 2D visuals, particularly with the regards to the various backgrounds throughout the game. The color palettes of the more fantastical areas are phenomenal, but honestly, I think the game is most beautiful in its more down-to-earth tones of its Colorado-based introduction. The game's theme of being true to yourself despite the outside expectations of others is also very moving. And then you can't gloss over the way that the soundtrack works, where they kind of made it compose these background songs, pieces of music, I guess, that kind of work around the somewhat random riffing that you can do as you go through the environments on the guitar. So it kind of creates a very beautiful sort of prog rock soundscape that goes along with the actual artwork that is in the game. So Artful Escape number 23. At number 22, I have Red Dead Redemption 2. At first, I debated skipping over Red Dead 2 in a similar fashion to what I did with The Last of Us Part 2, just because visual fidelity is not really what I wanted to highlight with this list. But Red Dead 2 earns its spot for its unmatched presentation of the wilderness and the simulation of the countless animals that inhabit it. The storytelling and action of the game is so compelling that this aspect, I think, risks being overlooked. But if you just take a ride out into the woods, and just observe the world around you, it can truly be an awe-inspiring experience with the amount of detail that they packed in there. So in that sense, I think it's very much an excellent analog for our own real world, where it's very easy to kind of lose sight of the beauty of the world around us. So Red Dead Redemption 2, very beautiful game in the way that it does the environments. It's number 22 on my list. At number 21, I have Tetris Effect Connected. It's kind of wild to put a block droppy game on this list, but Tetris Effect is really all about its synesthetic blending of audio and visuals. And from the first moments of the story mode, or whatever corny name they have for it, with the dolphins that are mixed with hydelics connected in that first scene, it immediately kind of hammers that home. But that intro sort of level, I guess, quote unquote, is incredible. I think my favorite is actually toward the end with the space scene that's mixed with this piece of music called Hometown. A level that can be truly goosebump inducing if you're in the right mind space for it. But I think what really puts this game over the edge and into this list for me is the menu system that allows you to take a look at the our world, at the globe, with a real-time look at the various people playing Tetris Effect across the world as it spins, and you can have a song of your choice from the soundtrack playing in the background while you kind of loop around there. There's so much darkness in our world today that just like a weirdly uniting experience like Tetris Effect really does kind of have the ability to inspire. As strange as that may sound, if you haven't experienced it for yourself, I can understand how this definitely might seem a little bit esoteric considering it is literally just Tetris. But if you go into it with the right mindset, I'm telling you, it can be one of the most beautiful experiences in games. At number 20, I have Croc, Legend of the Gobos. At first, I didn't think it would be possible for me to put any PlayStation 1 games on the list, just considering how poorly aged that entire generation of gaming is today. But then I thought about Croc, which is a game with a simple cartoony art style that still ages well, even today. And it's mixed with one of what I would consider gaming's truly great early soundtracks. It heavily utilizes the game's main leitmotif while changing up the instrumentation and key to reflect where the player is in the game, which somehow makes it one of the most nostalgic soundtracks to me today. But to sum everything up, Croc has an inviting world. It's got truly adorable characters, even the enemies, that are backed by a gorgeously simplistic but nostalgic soundtrack. All this might not work on a newcomer to the game to the same degree it does for me as someone who grew up playing it. I think it was the first PlayStation 1 game I ever properly owned. But then again, it just might, and you should have the opportunity to try it for yourself someday soon, as a remake from the original studio Argonaut Software is currently in the works. Up at number 19, I have Okami. Okami is definitely the game on this list that I played the least, and one of only two that I haven't finished. But you really don't have to spend more than a few seconds with the game to understand how shockingly beautiful it is for a PlayStation 2 game. It features like a Sumi-E inspired cel-shaded visual style, which is striking in screenshots, but truly stunning in motion. I think you gotta actually have it running on your television in front of you to really understand how beautiful it can be. And then the game doubles down on its fantastic art direction with its mechanics. With the player, and you play as the Japanese sun god Amaterasu, utilizing a celestial paintbrush to restore life and beauty to the world around you. So it's beautiful in visuals and also in its theming. At number 18, I have Super Mario 3D World. In terms of bringing out absolutely stunning visuals from limited hardware, no one else even approaches the level of Nintendo. While what they did with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom in light of the hardware is impressive, when they really boil down the scope like they did with Super Mario 3D World, they are able to turn in truly stunning works of art that manage to outpace contemporaries on much more powerful hardware. If you compare Super Mario 3D World with like the Spyro Reignited trilogy, for example, you'll be shocked at the gap between them, despite the fact that 3D World is 5 years older and running on a Wii U, for God's sake. The texture work on the environments in this game is particularly impressive across its variety of beautiful environments as well. It's just a gorgeous game. I was really blown away when I played it for the first time a few years ago with my wife, playing through the co-op that you can do in that game. So very impressive game in terms of its visual direction. At number 17, I really have two games because they look very similar and go together. But I have basically the modern God of War games, God of War from 2018 and Ragnarok. Um, like I mentioned, I don't want visual fidelity to dominate this list, but I have to admit those two modern God of War games are absolutely stunning works of art, particularly running at buttery smooth 60 FPS on modern hardware, the PS5. Every detail, from the pores and wrinkles on Kratos' skin to the violent brutality with which he dismembers his foes, is on point. And the game also blows away its contemporaries through its environmental art, particularly in Ragnarok with its more varied scope and environments. Not much else really needs to be said here. This is a pair of games that truly speak for themselves. I would easily put them in the top five most impressive visuals in gaming today. But in terms of most beautiful games, I've got it here at number 17. At number 16, I have Bloodborne. Bloodborne is a hard game to rank as there are areas, like with its horrendously rendered grass, for example, where the game can actually be pretty ugly. But on the whole, I think it has one of the most enrapturing art styles of all time, which is hammered home the deeper into it you go. As a key part of how the game works is through its artistic storytelling and how it communicates its cosmic horror-tinged story. There are many key areas, moments, or bosses that have become indelible parts of the gaming subconscious just based on this imagery alone. And when you combine that with the game's just fantastic score, I mean, you got to check out the first Hunter and Lawrence, the first Vicar in particular. Those are my two favorite tracks from the game. And then, of course, its impeccable atmosphere. I would argue you get one of the most beautiful video games of all time. And now, just imagine it with that modded remaster. That gets all the more enticing as time goes on. Number 16, Bloodborne on this list. Number 15 is Super Mario Galaxy. While there's no doubt Super Mario 3D World, which I talked about earlier, is cleaner visually, I would argue the level of quality Nintendo was able to wring out of Mario Galaxy 6 years earlier on the Wii, which is a console incapable of even rendering a picture in HD, is even more impressive, especially when you consider that game's more impressive scope and variety of its environments. The spacefaring aesthetic is also just a bit more engrossing, I think, as is the soundtrack, which I think is very obviously the best in the history of the Mario series. And then you mix in the art, the actual art that they put together for Rosalina's storybook, and then not to mention the touching way that you go through that and learn the story over time. And I think you have what is without question the most beautiful mainline Mario game ever made. At number 14, I have Final Fantasy IX. Final Fantasy IX stood out as my other kind of oh yeah moment when realizing I couldn't fully skip over the PlayStation 1 for this list. While the art style can be off-putting at first, especially when coming over from the more realistic proportions and tone of Final Fantasy VIII, I think Nine's more whimsical atmosphere and use of warm colors makes more of a lasting impression. And even if you aren't crazy about the character designs, the environments, and particularly those cutscenes, which surpass many early PlayStation 2 games, are just unassailable, especially in the absolutely gorgeous remaster of the game that's available on modern hardware. And then, of course, flowing through all this is perhaps Hironobu Sakaguchi's most touching storytelling. This is his love letter to the legendary series he birthed, after all. And then, of course, some of Nobuo Uematsu's most standout songwriting. So, Final Fantasy IX, I think, deserving of number 14 on this list. At number 13, I have Elden Ring. Like many other modern From Software titles, Elden Ring is perhaps the best example of a game that is limited technically when compared to its contemporaries, but that outstrips them almost all of them when it comes to its art direction, its tone, and its atmosphere. The use of the Erd Tree alone as just this stunningly beautiful centerpiece for the game's atmospherically rich world, particularly late game when you get closer to it and start to realize what it represents, really stands out as a key part of the artistry of this game. And then there's the jaw-dropping Siofra River underground area with its star-studded underground ceiling and unforgettable reveal the first time you see it. I guarantee you'll remember it. And then the lighting modeling in the more realistic underground caves is no less impressive as well. I am always kind of, if it's been a while since I've played Elden Ring, I go down to one of those caves and bring out a torch and just really impressed. So all in, the quality of the moment-to-moment art in the Elden Ring is truly impressive, especially when you consider just how big that game is, earning a spot here kind of in the middle of this list. But number 12, I have Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. I played Mario Kart 8 Deluxe for the first time in the last couple of years, and it was one of those rare times where I just had to take a moment and marvel at the visual quality I was seeing, especially understanding that I was looking at a modern port of a decade-old game from the Wii U. The incredible amount of just impeccably beautiful art assets that Nintendo packed into every track here, and there are now almost 100 of them after all the DLC we've gotten, is truly stunning, and it is the quality of each character model and vehicle as well. The Yoshi's Island track that they added recently as part of the booster pack or whatever they called those added tracks is a particular standout as it replicates the crayon-inspired art of the Super Nintendo original. So at the time this released in 2014, Mario Kart 8 had to be one of the most visually impressive games ever, and quite frankly, more than 10 years later, I would argue it still is. Very beautiful game. Up at number 11, I have The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening remake for the Nintendo Switch. I understand that it's got some performance issues and that might ding it in the eyes of some. But if you kind of can put that aside, the Switch remake of Link's Awakening is another impressive effort from the art wizards at Nintendo. I think what puts this game over the top is the shockingly heartfelt and at times heart-wrenching storytelling that was, of course, present in the original game. Link's date with Marin is a particular standout moment to me, especially given the context of the discussions they have, combined with the game's ambivalent ending. And I even found beauty in the Dungeon Maker side quest that was exclusive to the Switch version, considering even though I was using pre-existing pieces and assets, these felt like kind of artistic creations and pieces of game design of my own making. I won't say too much more about the understated beauty of Link's Awakening in case there are those among you that haven't had the game spoiled, but it is truly deserving of this list and damn near earning a top 10 spot here. So moving into the top 10 with number 10, we have Spiritfarer. Another great example of how, in some cases, 3D games still can't match the beauty of 2D art. Just every aspect of Spiritfarer's visual design is stunning, from the use of color to the kind of drawing-esque art style to the varied atmospheric undertones to sail around the game's surprisingly large and dense world. On top of this, it just invites player-led expression through the constant creation and tinkering of your vessel, which really does come to be a traveling home in the afterlife. While I think a lot of the writing does miss the mark and is way too melodramatic to allow the attempts at hard-hitting conversations to really land, I do think the camaraderie of the community you build on that ship and the touching departure of each character is handled very well. And all of that together, that's the art mixed with that kind of the theming there, and the music as well, finds this game a spot at number 10. Up at number 9, I have Ghosts of Tsushima. It's a game that was designed to be beautiful, and it is beautiful. The environments are certainly a big part of why this game works as well as it does, but I would argue the absolutely ridiculous amount of particles utilized, from blowing leaves to snowflakes to pollen, take it to another level. The way the game is designed too, particularly with regards to its open world activities like composing haikus while reflecting on nature, or bathing in picturesque hot springs while reflecting on nature, or following foxes to honor Shinto shrines, or navigating platforming puzzles up a scenic overlook to marvel at the world design, they all kind of reinforce everything the game is doing artistically. And then despite the amount of repetitive fighting, Ghost of Tsushima is at its best in these moments, when it just invites the player to slow down and breathe and admire the beauty around them. And that was clearly something that influenced the UI design as well. Like trying to take away the UI elements that you don't need. So a lot of times when you're going around in the world, there are no UI elements, and you use the wind to guide you to places that you're trying to get to without the use of a minimap. So all of those things put together just makes Ghost of Tsushima truly one of the most beautiful games. At number eight, I have the Demon Souls remake for PlayStation 5. Demon Souls was such a great launch title for the PS5, not only because of its quality, but also because of just how damn impressive it is visually. Blue Point Games are true technical wizards when it comes to remaking classics, and one look at the visual design of this remake, particularly in motion, will explain that to you better than I ever could. And as impressive as the animation work and anime design is here, I think it's the environments and the world around you, and arguably the main character of the game anyway, the world of Demon Souls, that truly is inspiration, I think, to video games and a high watermark for environmental artwork in video games today. And it also kind of makes you really disgusted by what we just found out about how this team has been wasted with the stupidity of PlayStation when they're trying to get them to make this God of War live service game. So I'm glad that Blue Point is still going to be sticking around despite that stupidity on the part of PlayStation. Hopefully they can get back to making some beautiful games. Number seven on my list is kind of just broadly Pokemon Gen 4. When done right, I think it's hard for any game today to match the beauty of great pixel art. There are a number of old school JRPGs that I considered for this list and that came very close to making the cut. Final Fantasy VI perhaps is the leading example. But when I think about classic pixel art perfected, I don't think it gets much better than the Gen 4 Pokemon games on the DS, which include Pokemon Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, as well as Heart Gold and Soul Silver. The environments here are lush and gorgeous, the colors are vibrant, and the music across all of these games is arguably the best the series has ever seen. But beyond that, I think the mostly static Pokemon art in Gen 4 is the peak of the series, with diminishing returns ever since, which is very colorful and stylish and well drawn. And I think just kind of the definitive look for Pokemon, in my opinion. That's still kind of the way that I view them. And then, like you saw what they did with Gen 5 with the much uglier and animated versions that Game Freak came back with, it was just such a huge disappointment to me. So I think that just kind of made Gen 4 age even better. Um, so I'm more nostalgic for some of the older Pokemon titles, like the original Gold and Silver in particular. And there's something to be said for the nearly equally vibrant art of the Gen 3 games as well. But I think the palette of Gen 4 is peak Pokemon art. And given the state of these games today with what we saw with Scarlet and Violet, we may never see them surpassed. But at number six, I have Journey. So it's a game whose entire identity is centered around being beautiful. So it's good that it nails that and makes it up very high on this list. Even though it only lasts most players between an hour and a half, the absolutely gobsmacking beauty of the environments in this game ensure that all of its moments and environments will stay with you forever. But while the art style is indeed fantastic, I think it's the understated storytelling and themes, not to mention Austin Wintory's legendary score, that make it an all-time classic and clear standout choice for video games as an art form, and a beautiful one at that. Up at number five, I have To the Moon Remastered. To the Moon is an example of a game that I consider to be beautiful at every level, from the heartfelt and heart-wrenching storytelling to the unforgettable and surprisingly multifaceted and deep characters, to the incredible soundtrack from Ken Gao that I consider to be the greatest video game soundtrack ever written, to the absolutely gorgeous pixel art visuals. Some environments and moments, like the areas around Anya the Lighthouse, or a special reunion or first meeting, depending on your point of view, of two critical characters, won't say any more than that for those of you who haven't played it, are particular standouts that will be with me for a lifetime. And while the original version that's currently available, obviously on PC, but also on PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series consoles are great, surprisingly, it is the Switch version, which has remastered and updated art and higher definition sound, which was released in 2020, that is the clear standout as the best version available on the market today. So To the Moon is an experience that I will cherish for a lifetime, and I cannot imagine anyone with a pulse playing it for the first time today and not having a similar reaction. Up at number four, I have The Legend of Zelda, The Minish Cap. While Zelda is well represented on this list, and there are several games in this series that are truly beautiful in their own way, including some that I didn't even mention here, like Oracle of Seasons, and Twilight Princess, and Majora's Mask, there was only one game in the series that could come out at the top, and that's Minish Cap for the Game Boy Advance. We have maybe the greatest classic pixel art that I've ever seen, and it's hammered home with the game's vibrant color palette and unique shrinking mechanic that allows you to view the world from an inside view. It is the background art of the environments in these moments, combined with the way the game sort of retrains you to look at your environment after gaining the ability to shrink, particularly in Hyrule Town, which is just a masterpiece of video game design in its own right. All this comes together to make the Minish Cap one of the most beautiful pieces of art I've ever witnessed. At number three, we have Octopath Traveler 2. So, as good as classic pixel art is, there's no question the HD 2D style that the original Octopath Traveler created is even better, mixing realistic and gorgeous environmental animation and lighting effects with high definition pixel art to create true works of art in every frame. For now, I would say Octopath Traveler 2 is that concept perfected. Beyond the artwork, I still think the concept of Octopath Traveler, which introduces eight very different characters and brings them together to support each other through their individual hardships, is also inspired. And it is elevated to such an incredible degree with the sequel, which outstrips the storytelling of the still solid original, beyond even my wildest dreams. I also have to give a shout out to the map design of both games, in particular, which are just works of art in their own rights, particularly with the starlight reflecting beauty of the nighttime version of Octopath Traveler 2, and I think sort of the more Game of Thrones inspired art of Octopath Traveler 1. And then just finally wrapping all this together is the other contender next to the Moon for greatest video game soundtrack of all time. Unlike To the Moon, which is a pretty brief listen, the Octopath Traveler 2 soundtrack from Yasunori Nishiki is a 7+ hour epic that elevates even simple world exploration to previously unforeseen heights. Octopath Traveler 2, can't say enough about it. It's a masterpiece of a video game and truly one of the most beautiful video games ever made. But at number two, I have Shadow of the Colossus. Now, there are three versions of Shadow of the Colossus, and I think all of them in their own way are worthy of being this high on the list. The original PS2 version is perhaps the most impressive, considering the limitations of the hardware and the unbelievable scope and vision of that game, which was ahead of its time by years, if not decades. The PlayStation 3 version then takes that original sort of visual landscape and then clears up some of the fogging and fixes the at times choppy frame rate of the original. Then you have the Blue Point remaster, or sort of remake, kind of blurs the line between the two, that was designed for the PS4. And those art assets were redeveloped from the ground up to create one of the most visually appealing games available on modern hardware, alongside some of the most impressive sound design I've ever heard. In particular, that Blue Point really reworked the sound design, and it is truly staggering how good it is. And then you, of course, have Ko Otani, the composer's score, which was just ahead of its time as the rest of the game in 2005 and still holds up beautifully today. And it, of course, enhances all three versions. The true strength of Shadow of the Colossus, on top of all of this, is just its simple approach to storytelling, and then, of course, more critically, the understated way it tells and makes the character question their own actions without ever pointing a finger directly at them. There are no doubt no shortage of think pieces that have been produced over this piece of art, but at its core, the story being told here is a simple one, which only makes it the more effective at pulling the heartstrings of players of all ages over and over again. Shadow of the Colossus, the runner-up on this list. But my number one, it's Ori and the Will of the Wisps. There are a number of games that I considered for this list, both that made it and didn't, that are worthy of being discussed for being incredible works of art. But I'll be honest, from the second I set out to make this list, there was no question in my mind that the Ori games were going to come in at the top of this list. In many ways, they are in a league of their own. They are exemplary in every category, from art style to animation work to storytelling to music. While Will o' the Wisps has to take the top spot as a more modern version, obviously it's kind of that was developed as I guess they were both Xbox One games, but Will o' the Wisps came out in 2020, so they definitely were a little bit more advanced in what they could do, and it definitely benefits more from the Series X version. So I have to give it the top spot. But in many ways, I actually prefer Blind Forest in terms of its approach to storytelling and the characterization of its villain, quote unquote, and more memorable set pieces and musical tracks. But no matter which of the two games you discuss, the Ori games are, to me, the clear standouts for video games as an art form, able to move and inspire creativity and expression, I would argue, as well or better than any other medium available to it today. So Ori and the Will of the Wisp and Blind Forest, just the Ori series in general, takes the top spot on this list of the most beautiful video games ever made. So there we have it. My picks for the most beautiful video games ever made. I hope you come away with some newfound appreciation of these pieces of art, or perhaps even for your own picks that I may have not even discussed here. And if you do have some in mind that you think I've overlooked, please write into the podcast at ControlledBurnes with an ES at gmail.com and let me know your own picks. And then also, if you enjoy the show and you want to hear more lists, please subscribe, follow, like, review, wherever you listen to your podcasts. For now, and until next time, keep it warm.